let me introduce myself a little bit properly here. My initial study of Islam came from my father. He taught me the Quran. I studied with him how to read the Quran and memorize certain portions, as how many of us are brought up in Muslim societies, Muslim cultures, memorized, a considerable portion of the 30th chapter of the Quran, a little bit of Yasin, and a little bit of Amna Rasulu, all those texts. And after that, I studied with some Sufi masters in Pakistan. They taught me a lot in Brailwi mosques about Sufi mystics, their ideologies, their practices, and so on. After that, I went to university, at the Lahore University of Management Sciences, and Dr. Khalid Zahir taught me Islamic studies there. Asif Iftikhar was my teacher of Quranic Arabic, and I got affiliated with the Al-Morid Institute of Islamic Sciences in Pakistan. I used to be their research assistant in terms of writing book reviews, answering queries from Muslims all over the world. Muslims would write from Sweden, women with hijabs, and they would say post 9/11 in the increasingly Islamophobic environment, what should they do with the hijab? Should we remove it to protect ourselves, or should we keep it? So we used to answer difficult questions like that at our institute. In 2005, I wrote an article at the Islamic religious magazine Renaissance, and I broached the subject of homosexuality. It was received with immense derision and scorn from my own former teacher, Asif Iftikhar. And then, however, my own editor came to my defense, and he said, this is a topic which we must really talk about, because a considerable portion of the Muslim community happens to be gay. These are our youth, these are our children, what do we do with them? So one thing led to another, and I met our grand teacher, Javed Ahmed Ghamdi, in Pakistan. And I approached his own place, and I asked him, I said, this is how I feel about this particular issue. I don't think people have done justice to this issue. And it was 2007 those days, 2008. And back then, even my own arguments, I was studying the issue as well. They were not as well developed as they are now. And he basically told me that he finds no reasonable solution to this problem. And however, he did leave me with this one point. He said he would encourage me to study the tradition and produce whatever I find in form of my work. And he left it at that. And so to this date, I am in correspondence with the initial teachers of mine, and whenever I write something, I send them that. They are free to disagree with what I write, and vice versa. Over time, I found a shift in my tradition, and I became the Canada West coordinator for Universalist Muslims, which is a group based in Ottawa. We are a group which affirms LGBT Muslims completely. We have spaces, safe spaces, which are gender equal, religiously plural, and LGBT affirming. And so my work right now is mostly having a conversation with the conservative clergy members across North America, be it Yasser Qadi from Rhodes College, be it Abdullah Hakim Quick, who came to campus recently, and you are mostly familiar with the uproar that started, or be it many other people from Zaytuna Institute, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, or Imam Zaid Shakir. What has happened in Islam is that across the board, whether it's Sufi tradition, whether it is essentially, other traditions, and from the Saudi side, the Wahhabi tradition or the Salafi tradition, or whether it is the Sunni Brailwi Deobandi tradition from Pakistan and India, across the board there is a common understanding that that homosexuality is a grave sin in Islam. It's one of the major sins. Now, they're not speaking out of the blue. They have the tradition that backs them up. There are texts which are very, very prohibitive. One of the arguments that is used is that there is consensus amongst the Jews and the Christians that it is a major sin. However, you have noticed today, and you may have noticed in your own studies, that that consensus has been broken. It no longer is binding. Many Christians in the United Churches, Presbyterian, Lutherans, Episcopalians, Anglicans, you name it, they have come strongly in defense of the rights of LGBT, of the vulnerable LGBT Christian brothers and sisters. In Judaism, excepting some Orthodox groups, most of them, Reform, Reconstructionist, Conservative, have come out and openly affirmed same-sex marriages as well. In Islam, we have a small group of people who do affirm LGBT unions. They're mostly Muslims with progressive values and based in the United States, Universalist Muslims, which is our group in Canada, and the Inclusive Mosque Initiative in the United Kingdom. Other than that, we don't have much of support for LGBT youth. We don't have safe spaces. Not that I know of in Edmonton either. So what happens to our youth who come out? What happens to our gay Muslims and gay lesbian women, and what happens to them? They're essentially given this argument that this is a test for you which has been given to you by God, so if you need to hop on one leg for the rest of your life. Either indulge in permanent celibacy or have a marriage of convenience. These are the only two solutions which are offered. And sometimes, especially in the other circles, in the Abdullah Hakim Quick circles, the Bilal Phillips circles, the punishment that is meted out is death, based on the texts. That is why I took a very strong stand in recent media news. And some of you are familiar with that. Okay? Without further ado, I'm going to take you through the tradition. I'm going to show you what is happening in the contemporary Muslim world, and I'm going to show you the texts and how we can navigate through those texts in an alternative way. I present my opinions as opinions which come from my tradition. They may not necessarily reflect the tradition of a vast majority of Muslims, and that's okay. Boy was thrown from a high building. Where does ISIS get this from? Did they invent these punishments, or are they getting these punishments from some text? Turns out Ibn Abbas, and this is the Islam QA website, Sheikh Saleh Al-Munajjid from Saudi Arabia, he runs this website. One of the punishments is that they should be thrown from a high place and then thrown stones at them. What ISIS does is a reenactment of the ancient world. 6 schools of jurisprudence in Islam. 5 of them prescribe death based on different rationales. The Shia school basically prescribes death on the basis of the text attributed to Imam Ali. The Maliki school goes back to the Medinese tradition based on one of the scholars that Imam Malik would look up to, Shihab Zuhri. The Shafi'i tradition, they basically prescribe death on the basis of analogy, qiyas, with zina, which is fornication, adultery. The Hanbali school followed the Shafi'i school closely because Hanbali school was not as independent as the other schools. It is only one school, and one school alone, except maybe Zahiri, but Zahiri is out of date, it no longer exists, the school of Ibn Hazm. The Hanafi school prescribes the ta'zir punishment, discretionary, and they have the rationales. I don't have time to go into that. Point being, even though the Hanafi tradition is the largest tradition in South Asia, across the Middle East, it's the other 4 traditions that are predominant. These were the speakers which continue to be invited in Muslim spaces, whether it's Edmonton, whether it's Calgary, whether they're very popular. They are projected as mainstream Muslim scholars. Abdullah Hakim Quick's opinion is clear. This was his opinion 15 years ago. Bilal Phillips was recently interviewed in Germany. He basically repeated the same opinion, and he said that he's not calling for the death punishment to be implemented in Canadian society, in North America, but in a place under Islamic law. So he wants the law to be Islamic, first of all, and that will happen peacefully. Once the law comes in, then these punishments will be meted out. No doubt about it. What happens is, I've got this book over here which is called The Forbiddance of Homosexuality. Since you showed a book, I'll show one too. The Forbiddance of Homosexuality, which was written by a white convert in the United States. He now lives in Saudi Arabia. It was published by a mosque in the United States, Masjid al-Tawheed or something like that, Mustafa George DeBerry. In this entire book that he has written, he has missed out on the Hanafi tradition, which calls for the ta'zir punishment of homosexuality. In fact, what he's done is, he has placed in all the other 4 schools, and all the other 4 schools prescribe death. So this book is full of death punishments. And the only difference, of course, is the way in which the person has to be killed. This is Muslims for Calgary website. Somebody asked a question, in the Ask the Scholar section. This was 2015, last year. I picked it up from there. The person says, in the recent TV show, some lesbians and gays appeared, and the announcer said we should show some more respect to the feelings and behavior of others. They basically reproduce the response by Yusuf al-Qaradwi, who is a very popular scholar in the Middle East. It pretty much says, well, these punishments may seem cruel, but they have been suggested to maintain the purity of the Islamic society, and so on. Now imagine. Now this is Rob Breckenridge. We paint him as a red-wing, what do you call that radio? FM something in Calgary? FM something 39. I mean, he's a bit on the right. But he does ask these questions. He asks the question, imagine the torment the young Muslim struggling with his or her sexuality must feel upon reading such opinions from mainstream scholars. Imagine the message being sent to people in the Muslim community, how they should feel about LGBT people. And by treating them as well-respected community leaders, what message are we giving out to the broader Canadian community? This is not just his concern, this is Mickey Wilson. He said this is a part of his email he sent me last year. Or was it 2014? I do not remember. He says that he meets several young Muslim men and boys who are struggling to come out. Some have told their parents and some have not, and he does not know what to do with these boys and men. I said, I don't have the answers either. This is the more recent email, September 30th from last year. Corey Winus, he works with here in this department. He said he recently had to deal with the suicide of a 15-year-old Somali boy in Edmonton because of the struggle with his sexuality, and he was conflicted between his faith and his sexuality. And this is just one case. There are other Somali LGBT youth who are on the streets. Streets is no place for these young teenagers. Streets are filled with prostitution and drugs. These are our youth. These are Muslim youth. So what is the response of our mainstream scholars like Yasir Qadhi? Well, if you practice this particular thing, it is a sin. But if you preach it, justify it by writing articles, then it is kufr, apostasy, disbelief. So they stop the discussion from taking place. Now, of course, I could respond back with, well, what you're doing is baghi and istidad bil ray. We can take arguments from the tradition to combat this opinion. But that's neither here nor there. The other thing, the recent kerfuffle we had with the MSA on campus. Who does the MSA represent? They said they represent all Muslims on campus. Then why was it that all speakers invited were from one particular school of thought? Where were the Shias? Where were the Ismailis? Where were the Bohras? Where were the Ahmadis? Come to think of it, many of them are declared as heretics by some people. Well, Ahmadis are not Muslims. Well, Ismailis, they're just simply pretending. Shias, well, they abuse the companions. Islam is, there are 1.6 billion Muslims in the world. Each Muslim has his or her own relationship with Allah. And therefore, there are 1.6 billion Islams out there. I can speak only for myself. I can't speak for anybody else. And this is the same which is true. So, any speaker who is invited on campus, he can only speak for himself. He does not represent the entire breadth and diversity of the Islamic tradition. Take the Bohras. I mean, recently the Bohra spiritual leader passed away. They can't even decide who's the next leader going to be. They're in a bit of a limbo over there. Within the Shia, there are so many branches. Even in the Sunnis, Brelvis are in stark opposition to the Deobandis. They have passed takfir against each other. The Wahhabis passed takfir against every Abdullah, Hakim, and Sulaiman. Sufis have their own orders. They don't want to get into it. This is my tradition. Shehzad Salim was my editor of the magazine. Khalid Zahir was my Islamic studies professor. Ghamdi is my great-grand teacher. Islahi and Maulana Wahiduddin Khan, they're my great-grand teachers. And Hamiduddin Farahi is my great-great-grand teacher. They're from the Farah school in India. So I want to take the discussion away from all this death. I want to take it away into a different direction. I want to leave you with some positive thoughts here. I want to show you how I deal with the tradition. But in order to deal with the tradition, we need to address our biases first. LGBT Muslims are biased. It's a fact. What are they biased about? They're biased about the fact that they want a life which is based on intimacy, affection, and companionship. These are genuine human needs. Every human being wants that. Every human being. Everybody wants to love and to be loved, to touch and to be touched. What is the bias of the others who oppose this? Comes from here. The bias comes from the fact that what is their only way to understand the LGBT community? Maybe the Pride Parade. Maybe the fahisha they see out in Pride Parades and skimpy underwear. They basically associate everybody with the same brush. Trust me, our lives are not half as exciting as this. It'd be nice if they were as exciting. And then, of course, this one eats the poo-poo. You basically start claiming that, this is it's disgust. They bring the inner disgust and they project that on the Islamic tradition. Where does this disgust come from? That's a deep-rooted heterosexism out there. But keep in mind one thing, morality is based on the texts. Morality is not based on our capacity for disgust. So you can't approach the text claiming that I am unbiased. We all must acknowledge our biases. So before you approach the text, you have to have a clean inner side. So let's start with the Hadith literature, where the death penalties come from. This is the strongest strand in the Hadith literature. It comes from Ibn Abbas. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever you find doing the deed of the people of Lut, kill the one who does it and the one to whom it is done. And there are variants of that. But if you do undertake the analysis properly and go back to the traditional text, Tahtib al-Kamal, which is a criticism of the Hadith text, you will find that none of these texts, there are 9 strands of Hadith texts on homosexuality, none of them are either in Bukhari or Muslim, which are the most authentic books accepted by general Muslims. None of them is presented there. And yet you find people like Bilal Phillips and Hakim Quick and all the others out there, they regurgitate the death penalty like there is no tomorrow. It's matruk, abandoned. Ikrimah was declared untrustworthy. Many hadiths come from Ikrimah. The second strand, stone the upper and the lower. Once again, Bukhari and Nisai both deemed that matruk, abandoned. Asim bin Umar was declared weak. Third and I'm not going to go into the details over here. Third and fourth, we've done all this. My book is coming out, hopefully in the spring, Islamic Law and Same-Sex Unions. It deals with all of this in tremendous detail, more than I can show on the slides. Third, fourth strands, fifth, sixth strand, seventh, eighth, ninth strand, whether it's about death, whether it's about the Prophet cursing them 3 times, whether it's about eschatological opinion that what's going to happen in closer to the day of judgment, men will sleep with men, women will sleep with women. All of these texts are fabricated and do not pass the test of authenticity. And then of course there are other traditions there. What did the companions do? Abu Bakr, the first caliph, put some, Ilyas, we basically burnt him at the stake. Completely inauthentic again. There was a reason behind that. It had to do with irtidad, apostasy apostasy wars in Islam. Yet this is projected on mainstream Islamic websites. Ali, the 4th caliph. The Ali texts are even weaker. Now, with all due respect to my Shia brothers and sisters, at least in Sunni Islam, we consider those texts much weaker compared to the other texts that we have from Ibn Abbas. So this is Sheikh Mukhtar al-Shinkati. I mean, he's no friend of the LGBT community, but even he and other religious scholars come to the conclusion these texts are actually inauthentic. And then of course there are texts from Ibn Abbas and Ibn al-Zubair, again similar weaknesses. There are many other criticisms one can level against these texts. I don't have time to go into those. But I'll leave you with one thing, that is that Al-Ghazali, who is one of the main philosophers in Muslim history, big theologian as well, said that when a hadith, a saying of the Prophet, contradicts some scientific demonstration, then it's more suitable to reject the latter, the hadith. And what does science say? This is the Lebanese Medical Association for Sexual Health. There, in 2013, they released two statements. One statement was to affirm sexual orientation as an inherent constitutional aspect of human beings. Second, they condemned reparative therapy. The sexual reorientation therapy, they condemned it because it was found to be futile. And that has been done through years. It's not just happened like this. First they tried electrocution therapies, then they tried psychoanalysis, then they tried prayer-based therapies, and over time, psychologists, psychiatrists, they all come to the conclusion, none of that works. It's all mumbo jumbo. Again, big names in the Lebanese medical movement. So let's go back to the fundamental source of Muslim knowledge, the Quran. You need to start with a contextual analysis. You can't just pluck verses from here and there and then throw at people. When vulnerable Muslim LGBT youth actually approach their leaders, what do they get? They get the verse. لا تَتُونَ الرِّجَالَ شَحْمَةً مِّن دُونِ النِّسَاءِ بَلْ أَنْتُمْ قَوْمٌ مُسْرِفُونَ. Verily you approach men lustfully instead of women, nay, you are a transgressing lot. This is what the verse is thrown at them, and the young people, young boys, young girls who don't know much of the tradition, they basically go quiet. They say, well, that's the truth, that's it, that's how it's going to be. So what do they do for the rest of their lives? The rest of their lives are spent with cognitive dissonance, unable to deal with both things at the same time. What do they do? So what do we end up doing? We end up creating sinners and then judge them for being sinners. First we create them, then we judge them. And finally we kill them. That is under ISIS, of course. So that's the point I'm trying to raise over here. Look at Islam FAQ websites. 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 18-year-old. For the last 3-4 years, I'm seeing a similar trend. Well, I thought there's a boy in my class, I thought dirty about him. What should I do? I can't sleep properly. My whole existence is out of it because I feel, and this is haram, I know it is haram, I don't know what to do with it. They're genuine struggles of these youth. What do we offer them? Now, we have to offer them an alternative. We have to give them a solution. We have to give them some hope. We start with contextual analysis. You can't just pluck verses, because if you do that, then you end up doing this stuff. 551. Or you who have believed, do not take the Jews and Christians as allies. Some translations call it friends, others call it allies. So we're no longer friends, Mark Chan. And of course the other one, this is where people like ISIS do this, 29191. They pluck this verse out of context and they say, well, kill them, repel them wherever they repel you, and therefore they start saying, all right, let's go and kill left, right, and center. Classic ISIS strategy. You have to take the context. So where does the context come from? Let's look at verse 780. Do you commit an indecency which no one in the world has done before you? Tafsir of Ibn Kathir, one of the big names in Quranic exegesis. These names are very popular amongst current Muslim movements. Ibn Kathir, Ibn Taymiyyah, these are the names. Again, as Netta was mentioning, we pick and choose. Nobody wants to bother much with Ibn Hazm or Abu Hanifa. Again, a pick and choose strategy. We like it because Abu Hanifa was a rationalist. Ibn Hazm was again a textualist. He condemned all sorts of death punishments for homosexuals. But we pick up Ibn Taymiyyah, we pick up Ibn Kathir, Ibn Qudama, Ibn Qayyim. These are the people who are very prominent amongst contemporary Muslim movements in North America. So Tafsir Ibn Kathir says, just go by this Tafsir. Of course they condemn homosexuality, no doubt about it. But what does it say? It says this was a sin which was never committed before the people of Lut. But archaeological evidence suggests otherwise. Common Youth is basically, according to the biblical calendar, is dated around 1750, 1850 BC. Go by archaeological evidence, at most it's 2500, 2600, 2700 BC. But Mesopotamia was 3000 BC, much before that, and we have established record of same-sex relationships from Mesopotamia. Ignore that, go to Aboriginal cultures 10,000 years ago, and you will find evidence. These are some rock paintings, and that's the tomb of Nyanhum and Humhotep from Egypt, much before the time of the people of Youth. Illa, the racial edges. What is the reason behind the prohibition? Okay. It says, do you come to males and commit robbery on the highway and commit evil deeds in public assemblies? This is the verse, very clear. Now, what people try to do is they try to take this verse and superimpose it on modern day contemporary LGBT people. How many gay people do you know of who basically commit highway robbery? How many of you see basically committing evil deeds in public assemblies? And by public deeds, evil deeds in public assemblies, these are not just plain evil deeds. These are things like shortening. Go to the tafsir literature, you will learn about it, what shortening means. Shorten, to shorten someone. There was a Procrustean bed which was laid in Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, that's part of the tradition. And a hapless traveler was taken and made to fit on that bed. If he was too short, his legs were pulled until he died. If his legs were too long, they were sawed off. That's shortening. It comes from Tarikh-e-Tabari, history of the body, history by the body. I've only been able to find one example of this, and that was in the movie I Love You, Philip Morris. He was a bank robber and he was in love with this guy. So take a look at tafsir commentary. Tafsir-e-Jalalain, Tafsir-e-Tabrasi, which is a Shia tafsir. Tafsir ibn Kasir, Tafsir-e-Razi. All of them are basically talking about strangers. All of them. Okay? They said, make it your tradition that if you take a stranger in your country, you penetrate him and make him pay 4 dirhams. People will not come to your place if you did that. This is Tafsir-e-Jalalain. Jalaluddin Suyuti and Jalaluddin Mahalli. Tafsir-e-Tabrasi, the Shia tafsir says the same thing. Lut was banned from having guests. The Ahmadi tafsir gives you much more information as well. I've seen most of these, Shia, Ahmadi as well as Sunni. Go back to the Quran, same thing. You need to put everything in context. Look at verses 1177 to 79. Lut was concerned, he was grieved about his guests because he lacked the strength to protect them. And then of course the people of Lut told him, have we not forbidden you from other people? Lut was forbidden to have guests. Inhospitality, classic inhospitality. Now, hospitality is very important. To this date, Muslims pride themselves on this. When you go to a Muslim household, the guest will be fed first. Everybody else will eat later on. That's Muslim hospitality. We treat our guests above ourselves. Okay? So there's a very strong condemnation against inhospitality. Then again, most people, most contemporary scholars simply will ignore the entire context and zoom in on just this one particular verse, which is repeated in variant forms in 2755 and 26165 to 166. Same thing, similar translations. Think about it. What is the verse basically saying? Is the verse talking about sexual orientation? It isn't. It's simply referring to men. Okay? If there are 2 men over here, we'll just pick 2 men. We basically said, why are you, let's go with Mark Chang, and let's go with my friend Priyal Buz. So the verse is basically saying, why are you approaching this guy when there were women there for you? Now this is a general statement. Any general statement in the Quran is open to exceptions. Does this verse talk about the Khunsa Mushakkal, the intersex people? Does it talk about the Mukhannasun, the effeminates of Medina? Does this verse talk about transgender people? If it does not talk about all those categories of people, how can we claim it talks about gay people? It is a general statement referred to the entire people of the society, the entire community. You can't surely make the case that the entire community was gay, now would you? So it's basically telling you, you had a wife. If you look at the tafsir literature, all of them were married in tribal societies. Why are you chasing another man when you had a suitable partner for you at your home? Tazwajikum is the word used in the Quran. That's what the verse is basically saying, and that's what transgressing the bound. How can a gay person transgress the bound if his or her initial original need was not met in the first place? The only person who can transgress the bound is the person whose sexual needs were met at home, and then over and beyond, above that, he goes and approaches other people. That is transgressing the bounds. But of course, this nuance, this subtlety is lost. Because what are we known for? We are simply known for rote presentation. Oh, that's what he said. It has to be the same way as it was. No nuance, no subtlety, no whatsoever. People like to talk about context. Where does the context go when you basically look at these verses? That is our question. That's the question LGBT Muslims ask. Why do you not apply the same rigorous treatment you apply to other verses on warfare and women's rights to this issue? So where do we go from here? Do we stop here? Or do we actually take a brave stand and provide some solution to our youth, struggling youth? We have to be brave. So if we are to be brave, then we need to understand this entire rhetoric, the entire polemic, which is based on shahwa, which is based on hawa, desires, whims, urges. Human reason cannot be used as a mechanism for law. We can't make halal haram and haram halal. None of that should matter here. What matters over here is that human beings in general have a genuine need for love, for intimacy, for affection, for companionship. Violate that, because that is part of human nature, it's part of human fitra. We can't go against that. Try to go against that, you will create criminals, you will create sinners. This is what people like Sheikh Hakim Murad in the UK also claim. If it is a test, this is what he says, if it is a test, the majority will fail. Keisha Ali has recorded that in her book, Sexual Ethics in Islam. Majority will fail. I mean, take a look at the straight people. Where did adultery come from? It didn't come from the gays. Despite the fact they were allowed to marry 4 wives, they still committed adultery. So can you reasonably expect gay people to not have any sort of human connection, any human touch, and remain celibate for the rest of their lives? Think about it. Marriages of convenience are no solution, because the question that we need to ask ourselves is, if we want a gay brother to marry a sister, whose sister is it going to be? Is it going to be my sister? Is it going to be your sister? Or if it's a lesbian woman who needs to get married in a marriage of convenience, whose brother is it going to be? My brother or your brother? Would you like that? We need to think hard, long and hard about this. Permanent celibacy test. This is Zakiya. She's no fan of LGBT Muslims and same-sex unions, but this is what she writes in the context of widowed Muslim women. Do we really imagine that by providing only food, clothing, shelter to widows and divorced women, that all their needs in life will be met? That they can live locked away from intimate interaction with the opposite sex forever? How do human beings suggest such a lifestyle for a fellow human being? Especially when it's a lifestyle they don't accept for their own selves. There is a ray of hope. There are some brave Muslim scholars. This is the Grand Mufti of Zambia, Sheikh Asadullah Mawale. He's openly come out and said, you were created the way you are. Everyone is allowed in Islam and very much welcomed. This is what he said at the LGBT Muslim conference in South Africa. I'm not sure if it was Johannesburg or Cape Town, one of those places. And there are some other people who have come up. Professor Omid Safi in the United States, he fully affirms same-sex unions. Even Professor Muhammad Fadl in Toronto, but distinction they make is they support it as a civil union basis rather than as an Islamic marriage. That's the distinction that they make. These were the last 2 slides I had. I find myself in this situation. This is Deepa Mehta's water. This is the last end. This is the ending from that movie. This is Shakuntala, the protagonist. She's carrying a widowed child. She's 8 years old and she's a widow. Society around her does not understand the pains and torments and struggles they go through. And she's basically crying helplessly, is there someone who's going to help this child? Because her time is past. Her time is long gone. She's old. But that child, she's 8 years old, she has got a whole life in front of us, in front of her. There are Muslim youths out there who are 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, they have their whole life in front of them. We must provide them with a solution. And the only way we have to provide them a solution is through an Islamic sort of an argument towards same-sex unions. It doesn't have to be the same way as the Jews do it or the Christians do it or as it's done in the civil unions. It has to be done Islamically through the proper logic, through the proper framework, and we have done that in our forthcoming book, Islamic Law and Same-Sex Unions. It may be rejected and that's fine. We're not there for acceptance from everybody, but we will provide this alternative. So whoever accepts it, Allah be praised. Whoever rejects it, the difference of opinion in my community is a sign of Allah's mercy. Ikhtilaf is rahmah. At the end, I want to leave you with this slide. Take a long and hard look at this slide. These are LGBT Muslims. They're good people. They pay their dues. Early 20s. They have the whole life in front of them. Do not abandon them. Do not forsake them at the altar of freedom of obnoxious expressions.